Something so improbable, the impossible has happened.
5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow! In your life have you seen anything like that?
Hey TJ, what's going on? I'm Chandler, and this is Tiger Beat Sports. Welcome to a special edition of this all-crazy sports newscast.
Hey everybody, I'm Chandler with Sports, and this is the Sport Report.
Chandler with Sports is how he wants to go. With is his middle name, Sports his last name.
We're tired of bias. It's everywhere you look. At the Sport Report, we report on sports with a
neutral,
down the middle coverage
with an analytical spin.
We remove the bias so you can think about a team without any outside opinion.
No crazy points for attention. No power rankings.
No opinions.
Just sports.
We don't get paid $6.5 million a year to make stupid hot takes for attention. We also don't believe in clickbaiting you with outrageous or team-specific headlines. You decide how you want to view the game or team or the league. We're going to report on the facts without any bias. Hopefully the Orioles don't suspend us for that. We're out to change the game.
So let's get rolling. Hit it, Blaze.
This is the Sport Report.
Here's CWS.
On the Sport Report today, we're joined by Dan Gavitt, the Senior Vice President of Men's Basketball at the NCAA. He oversees the March Madness tournaments every year, as well as the postseason's NIT, the National Invitational Tournament, and the Division II and Division III Men's Basketball Championships. Dan, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing so far?
Doing great. Good to be with you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.
So, in a given year, you go through many days of basketball. I understand you're a basketball junkie through and through, and that's amazing. You come from a basketball background. Can you explain to me what your background is prior to being the SVP at for men's basketball at NCAA?
Well, I started my career as a graduate assistant basketball coach at Providence College, working for Rick Barnes, who's now the head coach at Tennessee. So I was an assistant coach for 6 years. Got to know the game from that perspective. Really started my network in basketball among the coaching profession in particular, I think, at that time. I then transitioned into administration, did some sports marketing work for a couple of years. But my next big opportunity, I guess, was I was an athletic director at Bryant College, now Bryant University, Division II school at the time, now Division I, and had an opportunity to run an athletic department and get to know the administrative side of the business as an athletic director, which led into the opportunity just before I came to the NCAA, working for the old Big East Conference when it was a larger league that was inclusive of football and men's basketball. And I was the first senior associate commissioner for basketball at the Big East Conference. And really, I'd say among all my opportunities, the one that probably has the most relevance into what I do now was when I was working at that conference office job at the Big East, because I helped to run the basketball tournament. I helped to schedule. I got involved with more national governance around playing rules and tournament selection process and, legislation around the game, and built out a network of Division I contacts that have really helped me in my current role at the NCAA over the last decade plus.
That's really cool. I actually didn't know about the Bryant College stuff, and I understand you had a history at the Big East, but to hear that kind of insight's really incredible. In a given year, what is your role during the tournament? I understand, I'm sure prep begins in November or even earlier, but can you explain what your role is during the tournament for March Madness, at least?
Sure. Well, for our staff, who does an incredible job, it really is an all-year planning process. Actually, monthly meetings for the Final Four start in June of every year, the year before. So we started meeting in Phoenix, for example, this year for the men's tournament in June on a monthly basis, leading up to the last meeting in February, and then getting there in April for the tournament. During the season, it's a lot of watching games, getting to games to the extent that I can, mostly tournament planning, but I do watch a ton of games to try to help be prepared to help support the men's basketball committee. I'm in the room during selection week, and while I don't have a vote, I think I have some level of influence and want to be able to be valuable to the committee as a resource. And so I work hard to prepare, know teams inside and out, know the landscape nationally before selections start, and that's a year-long process. That starts on the opening night of college basketball and goes right through the conference tournaments. And then during the championship itself, I get to Dayton for first four. I go to Atlanta to Warner Bros. Discovery Sports studios, and we set up a command center for the first and second round weekend. But don't travel that first weekend. We have a team that's ready to deal with any issues that might be happening at any of the 8 sites across the country in first and second rounds. And then I do get to all 4 regionals, one night at each of the regionals before heading on to the Final Four site. And then I go back and forth on the Final Four weekend between the women's and men's Final Four sites also.
Is there a particular Final Four site that you've really liked for your team that's kind of made things a little bit easier, or just, favorite preference or personal preference?
We have a lot of really great Final Four sites. It's hard to pick, one or even a few where we value all of them because they all offer unique opportunities and experiences for teams and fans. But Indianapolis is probably as good as there is. And I'm that's just not from my perspective because I'm not an Indy native. But I hear that from so many folks that attend regularly the Final Four. They love Indianapolis the way it sets up physically, all walkable, and it has good history. But there's so many others too. San Antonio is very popular as well, and moving out to getting an opportunity to have Final Fours out west, like we'll have back in Phoenix this year, and then Las Vegas in the future. It's exciting to go to all the places we have a chance to take the men's, women's Final Fours to, and it's really a national tournament, so we like to move it around.
I like that. Now that sports is moving into Vegas, I'm sure at some point they were going to come into Vegas and play a Final Four or even have multiple regionals. I know the Pac-12 tournament is out there. Mountain West does a tournament out there too, I believe. So it's definitely expanding. You mentioned you're in the committee room during selection week. What's your favorite part of the process, being in that room?
Well, probably from a personal standpoint, it's the relationships with the men's basketball committee members that I've been able to form over the years. There are 12 members of the committee, athletic directors and conference commissioners that are just the best people to work with. Committed. Really, you don't get an opportunity to serve on the basketball committee if you haven't had a distinguished career and are highly respected in our business. So those relationships and friendships have been gold to me, not just during their time of service, but long after their time of service is ended. And then just, working together as a team, supporting them, the committee, and working hard to make the very best, well-informed decisions about what teams get into the field, how they're seated, and how they're ultimately bracketed. It's never easy. It's always agonizing when the last team doesn't make the cut, or a number of teams don't make the cut. I've been there as an assistant coach. I was an assistant coach on 2 different Providence College teams that fell short and didn't make the field, played in the NIT. And so I remember those days. It's heartbreaking, but it also makes the tournament special, that it's that hard to get into and it's that hard to advance in when you do get an opportunity to play in it. And so, just working hard to try to get it right, and being diligent is probably the most rewarding part of that week.
That's awesome. Shifting gears a little bit. In 2021, the tournament had to shift to a kind of a single state Indiana venue, I guess you could say, modeled after the basketball tournament TBT's bubble plan from 2020. What did you guys see in that bubble plan that kind of stood out for you guys and helped set the foundation for future? I mean, if you had to run future tournaments in a quarantine-like environment.
Well, TBT was among many other events and properties that we studied significantly about success in altering a tournament and delivering an event that had to be dramatically and radically changed to keep everybody healthy and safe. Of course, the NBA bubble as well, and any number of properties that preceded us before we were able to put on the 2021 championship here in Indianapolis, and then the women's championship in San Antonio as well. I think just having those relationships and making sure you kind of work hard to ask all the right questions, get as much information as you can, and try to tailor it to your circumstance. It's a very unique tournament because there are 68 teams, and in some cases you're only there for one game, and in other cases you're there for 6. And so having to use multiple venues, some in the city of Indianapolis, as well as in Bloomington and West Lafayette at IU and at Purdue, created all sorts of challenges that we had to think through every possible scenario. And it was a very rewarding professional experience, to work with our team to build something and to figure something out that had never been done before and hopefully will never be done again.
Hopefully not. You all went to standalone primetime games for the later rounds, the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, during that tournament. Do you guys foresee that coming back for future tournaments? I know that was a hit with fans and other people that are involved in the sport.
Yeah, it's a great question. I like some elements of that. I think it's something that we keep in mind a little bit and may, reconsider at some point. Of course, those decisions are made in collaboration with our incredibly valued media partners at CBS and Warner Bros. Discovery. And while there was certainly growth in having the standalone windows in the Sweet 16, we saw attrition in the ratings for the Elite Eight games because they were no longer on Saturday and Sunday; they were on Sunday and Monday. And so, there was trade-offs, and ultimately our TV partners decided that's not the trade-off they wanted to make at this time. But it is something that we know we have some history with now, and there's some benefit on the Sweet 16 side. So there's really no active discussions about that right now, but it is something that once you experience, it's good to have data and information to consider in case you need to pivot at some point in the future.
Speaking of pivoting a little bit, what are your thoughts on possible expansion for the men's basketball tournament? It's currently up to 68. In 2011, it went from 65 to 68, and then prior to that, it went from 64 to 65. Do you foresee the tournament expanding beyond 68, maybe adding 4 more teams? Some coaches are, proponents for, hey, let's go to 96. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I don't know. This is a recommendation that came from the Transformation Committee that actually recommended consideration of expanding NCAA championship fields for sports that have 200 or more schools that sponsor that sport, as much as 25% of that sports sponsorship number. In men's and women's basketball, that would mean a tournament field size of around 90 plus. So I don't know what the appetite is for that. I know that historically in my decade at the NCAA, there's been very little appetite for expansion at all, let alone to that extreme number. Yet the basketball committees did talk about it this summer, took it very seriously. They take, the recommendation to heart. And there's been so much change in our business recently and since the last time the tournament's expanded that it is probably timely to take a good hard look at it again. But that shouldn't necessarily, lead anyone to think that it's going to happen or isn't going to happen. There's all sorts of things that have to be taken into consideration around the experience, the value, the calendar, the schedule, and ultimately, what the interest is of our media partners as well. So we'll know more over the course of this year, probably, as the committees continue to do their due diligence. But hard to kind of handicap and predict at this point.
From expansion to rule changes, I was at a CU NIT game this past spring, and you all changed media timeouts to be a little bit more close, to be closer. Yes. 17, 14, 11, 8, and 4, if I'm not mistaken. Do you guys think you'll continue that for the upcoming season in men's basketball as a whole, for the postseason tournament? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are those media timeouts going to stay for future events for men's basketball at least?
Great question. So there's an opportunity to experiment with that rule again this year during the regular season for conferences or during the postseason events. We are planning on using that experimental rule again during the NIT, National Invitation Tournament. We don't experiment during the NCAA tournament, so we wouldn't consider that. But we think that, it's a model to consider that avoids having back-to-back timeouts, which happens frequently in the second half when you have a bench-controlled timeout followed by a media timeout that's already scheduled. And it really disrupts the flow for the players, for fans. We think spacing them out, may have some utility. The initial results showed that there was better flow to the second half of games during last year's NIT when we experimented. But we'll see if there's an appetite for the rules committee to make it a more permanent rule or some semblance thereof. It doesn't have to be that model, but we hope it encourages discussion and consideration of how to fix that problem.
Awesome. 2 more questions for you. Where do you see men's basketball in 5 years? Hopefully you are there more than 5 years.
Well, I hope so too, but that's someone else's decision to make, not mine. I think the sport's very healthy. I think it will continue to be very popular. It's certainly undergoing dynamic change, as is all college athletics, because of NIL and the transfer portal, as well as the professional opportunities that exist for talented young men, even before they reach college age, or certainly thereafter. So we'll have to stay competitive for, attracting the very best players and providing a great experience and opportunity for them. I think that the sport will. I think we'll see more international presence too, like we have for the NBA. I think, more and more college players are coming from Canada and overseas, and I think that will continue as the game shrinks the planet and the popularity of the NBA and the international game continues to grow. So I'm bullish and optimistic about the future, but I think it will continue to change and evolve. And some of those things that I mentioned around the student athlete experience and their opportunity to make money from their name, image, and likeness, and have a little more freedom and flexibility to change schools will continue to have some kind of impact on the sport.
It's actually funny you mentioned NIL and the transfer portal. That was going to be my final question for the basketball side of things, before we touch on your personal background a little bit. Do you think NIL and transfer portal are making men's basketball better?
Better. I don't know if I, think about it in such a linear way, better or worse. I just think it's a new reality. I think I do think it creates challenges for coaches, and some student athletes and teams who get impacted by roster turnover that is hard to predict and can be disruptive from a team perspective. But you balance that off with more flexibility and opportunity for individual student athletes to pursue their dreams and where their best fit is. I do think we'll be better served when we have more experience with those two opportunities. I think there's probably bad decisions that are being made right now, and maybe some bad outcomes that are just a result of poor decision making or inexperience in this new era. But my hope is that over a reasonable amount of time that we'll find our level that makes sense and that is more manageable for coaches, for student athletes, for teams. And we won't have quite as much churn and roster turnover as we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, that would be nice. Some continuity on some rosters for sure. Yeah. All right, yeah. Two quick questions and I'll let you go. Once again, thanks to Dan Gavitt for joining us today. Who's been your favorite Cinderella in your lifetime? Favorite Cinderella run? Whether you've been on the job, whether you've been as a fan or coach, who's been your favorite?
I don't know. Back when I was at the conference office in the Big East Conference, one of the teams that I followed in the postseason was Georgetown. They had a very good team. John Thompson III was the coach, and they were playing in Chicago, and it was the first round. And I was I felt pretty confident about the team because I had seen them all season long, and they were really good. And they played VCU. Coached at that time by Shaka Smart. And I was sitting behind the bench, and it was an early game that afternoon. And VCU came out and jumped the Hoyas big time that day. And we all know, I think, what happened after that. VCU advanced to the Final Four. So they were a very legit, talented, tough group. And while I hated to see the conference team that I was there to follow and support, Georgetown, go down, I enormously respected that team, Coach Smart and their players, because that was a very, very good team. And to see them go on and have the kind of success they had, which surprised everybody, was pretty awesome to witness.
And that was the first year that the tournament went to 68 teams, and VCU became the first four team to move on to the Final Four that year, right?
Yeah, and I think because of that, no one gave them any chance. There's no, we've had a couple teams. UCLA has done that since then. We've had other teams move on to the regional round, but I don't think anybody thought there was any chance that VCU could do what they did. And they were a very very talented, very deserving team that beat a lot of good teams on the way to the Final Four that year.
And if I'm not mistaken, 9 out of the 11 years that you guys have expanded to 68, those at least one team from the first 4 games in Dayton have advanced to at least the round of 32.
Correct. Yeah, and it's made the tournament even more special because one more round you can't predict what the outcome is going to be.
It's true, and it's why it's my favorite time of year. I'm sure it's yours as well. It's something that is unrivaled in professional college sports, anything in this world. It is the best 3 weeks in sports, no questions asked. All right, final question for you. You got any advice or do you have any advice for people who are joining the sports industry, whether it be marketing? Because I understand you ran a sports marketing firm way back in the day.
Yeah.
What are your advice for people trying to build a brand or just trying to get into the industry? I guess that's 2 separate questions.
Well, if you're passionate about it, I'd start as early as you can. I mean, starting as an undergraduate while you're on a college campus is a great place to start because there's so many opportunities on a college campus to work in sports, event management, for communications, to now even help to produce and put on games for television's sake because there's so many conference networks, and ESPN Plus has opportunities that work through their conference. So getting involved and building experience, a little bit of a network, and somewhat of a resume even before you graduate from college is a great opportunity. Because once you do graduate, now you're in the market and you're having to compete for opportunities that are very hard to get and competitive. And having that experience and some background is a great opportunity that presents itself for 4 years of college. So I would say that would be my my best advice at this point. And then just being yourself and putting yourself out there and making sure you meet as many people as you can and leave a good impression and drop a note, even handwritten, as old fashioned as that sounds, to someone. It makes an impression that people don't forget.
When you say handwritten notes, my grandfather says the same thing. Do you send thank you notes to people? Do you still do the handwritten thing as well for stuff that you do? That's awesome.
I do, and I actually wish I did it a little bit more than I do, but I certainly still do. And it always strikes me when I get a handwritten note from someone else. I just remember it a little bit more. It just stands out because it happens so infrequently now. I think it is a way to differentiate and distinguish yourself if you take the time and effort.
Thank you for the advice. Thank you for your time today, Dan. Dan Gavitt joined us on the Sport Report today. He is the Senior Vice President of men's basketball at the NCAA. Dan, best of luck to you and your team in this upcoming season.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Great to be with you.
This podcast is copyrighted by the Sport Report for viewers to understand sports from a neutral perspective and news reporting basis. Any other use of this podcast, the Sport Report logos, or anything associated with the company without the express written consent of Chandler with Sports is strictly prohibited.